Hi, I'm Liberty.
And I'm Ben.
And I'm Sir. Can I use my real name?
Of course. Teachers do have them, don't they?
Yes. I'm Peter Andrews. What we're going to do in this video is take you deeper into Macbeth so that you can think about the character, the themes, the language. If the play is just black and white on the page for you at the moment, we're going to change this for you into colourful meaning.
You can use this video as you're studying the play in class, and we guarantee you'll know the play much better at the end because we're going to go through each scene in turn,
Summarising just what is going on. And then, at the end of each act, guess who's going to ask you the questions? You've got it.
At the end of each act, I'll ask you questions and you'll see parts of the play on your screen with the important quotes shown to fit the TV screen. Sometimes these quotes are given with a special line break symbol, so always consult your original text when quoting one of your own essays. In the right-hand corner of your screen are moving digital numbers. If you consult the index on the back of your video, you can shuttle back and forth to find the scene you wish to study. And then there's some work for you to do to help fit in with your school GCSE work.
Don't you know it?
Well, it can't all be fun. At the end of each act, I'll ask you questions and give you ideas for making your own notes and assembling the quotes that will be useful in an essay. So that at the end of each act,
we'll have summarised the play, scene by scene.
We'll even have acted parts of it out, for it is a play after all, not just a book.
And he'll have given you questions.
And you'll have been in charge, pausing when you want to do the work that will help you to know the play and achieve the success in your writing on Shakespeare. So get yourself pad, pencil, and of course the play, and we'll begin.
Scene 1 starts with the sound of thunder and lightning, which sets the supernatural mood of the play. 3 witches have met and say they are going to meet Macbeth on the heath after the battle's lost and won. Good and evil are mixed up from the start when they chant, "Fair is foul and foul is fair."
Scene 2 gives us the background to what is going on in 11th century Scotland. A wounded captain is brought before King Duncan and tells him about the battle which the loyal Scots are fighting against invading Norwegian forces. Fighting with the invaders are soldiers led by the traitorous Scottish lord, the Thane of Cawdor. The captain refers to Macbeth, who is a general fighting for the king, as brave Macbeth, and gives a picture of him in battle with his sword, which smoked with bloody execution. Then in comes Ross, a nobleman, and tells the king and the court that the Scots are victorious, that Norway have given in. The king pronounces death on the Thane of Cawdor and instructs that his title should be given to Macbeth. This is a reward. For what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won.
Now back to the witches. They reappear at the start of scene 3 and are talking about the evil things they have done. When they hear a drum, they know that Macbeth is approaching. Macbeth comes on with his friend Banquo from the battle. His first words echo what the witches said at the end of scene 1. "So fair and foul a day I have not seen." Banquo is the first to see the witches and challenges them. When Macbeth does this, they greet him in turn. "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter." This utterly shocks Macbeth. Banquo challenges the witches to tell him what is in store for him. They tell him that he will be lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. The witches vanish and will not answer Macbeth's question, which is that he knows he is Thane of Glamis, but how can he become Thane of Cawdor and king? Macbeth and Banquo discuss what the witches said, and then Ross and Angus come in and tell Macbeth that the king has given him the title of Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth is shocked. Whilst the others are talking, we hear his thoughts and see how petrified he is by what has come into his head, the thought that he may become king by murdering Duncan. The scene ends with Macbeth saying to Banquo that they'll talk more about what has happened.
In scene 4, we're back in the palace with the king. He hears that the Thane of Cawdor, the traitor that is, has been executed, and the good king ponders how two-faced people can be. There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. Macbeth and Banquo enter and are greeted by the king. The king then announces something very important. His eldest son Malcolm shall succeed him, and that he is now the Prince of Cumberland. Again we hear Macbeth's black and deep desires, and clearly they are evil. Stars hide your fires, let no light see my black and deep desires. Macbeth leaves because the whole court is going to spend some time at Macbeth's castle in Inverness, and Macbeth leaves to get things ready.
In scene 5, we meet Macbeth's wife. She is reading a letter Macbeth has sent her, telling her about what the witches said. She's determined that her husband shall be king, but she's worried that Macbeth hasn't got the guts to go for it. Okay, I wouldn't use that phrase in an essay. She knows that he is too full of the milk of human kindness. She wants him there so that she can pour my spirits in thine ear. She needs to spur him on. A messenger comes in, and she's shocked when he announces that the king is coming to her castle tonight. When he leaves, she calls on the spirits to... Oh, I can't speak her words. It sounds daft coming from me.
Okay, well I'll do it then. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my women's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief.
Then Macbeth comes in, and his wife, in a roundabout way, makes it clear that something has got to happen to the king during his stay.
The play is moving on, and in scene 6, the king and the court arrive at Macbeth's castle, remarking on what a beautiful place it is. Lady Macbeth greets him at the gates, and they all go in. That wasn't a very long scene. Can we do the next one together?
Yeah, okay. This scene starts off with what we have seen and heard before. Macbeth speaking his thoughts, so we know what is going on in his mind. He's thinking about what he has to do if he wants to become king. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. Macbeth wants it over and done with, but then he starts to give himself all the reasons why they shouldn't do it. Duncan is there in double trust, because Macbeth is both his relative and his host. He also recognizes that Duncan is a very good king. His wife interrupts his thoughts, asking him why he has left the room where they are all eating. Macbeth tells her then that they won't murder the king, and that we will proceed no further in this business.
Then his wife really gives him some grief.
Now I know why you wanted to share this scene.
She throws question after question at him, taunting him about being a man. Then she says something even more horrible than before, something which goes against all woman is supposed to be. I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed the brains out. Her husband starts to waver, and now she's got him going, she says she'll get Duncan's guards drunk, and then she and Macbeth can do whatever they want. Macbeth is becoming convinced, and says that everyone will think the guards did it if they use the guards' knives and put the blood all over them. The scene ends with Macbeth saying that his mind is made up to do this terrible feat. They return to the banquet.
Ben and Liberty have given you a very thorough summary there. The action in this play moves at a tremendous pace, doesn't it? In fact, this is Shakespeare's shortest play. The act started with evil in the shape of the three witches and ends with evil as Macbeth is determined to murder his king. Evil is one of the important themes of the play, and throughout, evil and darkness are contrasted to good and light. Macbeth, because it has so much evil, darkness and blood in it, has a very particular status for actors. You'll never hear actors say, "I'm touring with Macbeth" all over Britain. They're so superstitious about the play that they always refer to it as the Scottish play. But now's the time for you to do a bit of work, which will help you to understand the play when you come to write about it and for later revision. The 4 pegs on which I'm going to hang my comments are themes, characters, imagery, and language. I shall give you questions and ideas for notes, and you can pause the film after each comment. If you have your own copy of the play, you can underline words or phrases or highlight them with a highlighter pen. Themes are the important ideas contained in the play, which are investigated through what the characters do, the action, and what they say. This is shown in dialogue, and often in Shakespeare, soliloquy, when the audience overhears what a character is saying or thinking to themselves. All this, of course, is expressed in language. The aspect of language I want you to consider at the moment is imagery. This is the word given to the pictures, the images that form in your mind through a writer's choice of words or descriptions. For example, imagery and the theme of evil come together when Lady Macbeth says to her husband that he must look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent underneath it. Now, let's start to make our list. We'll do it like this. On a fresh sheet of paper in your file, put the heading theme and then imagery, and start to make a list of what you consider evil. You can start with the witches. And under imagery, all the references to dark, darkness, and night. Notes will do fine, but make sure they make sense to you. Now, let's move on to character. The play is called after its central character, and we're aware of him right from the start. Macbeth is evil, but in Shakespeare, nothing is very often black or white. Get another piece of paper, head it Character, Macbeth, draw a line down the center of a page, head one side good points and the other bad points. The first good point is that the captain in scene 2 refers to Macbeth as brave Macbeth. I'll let you go on to continue both lists with quotes from the play. The other person we've clearly got to look at under the heading of character is Lady Macbeth. Here's how I want you to make notes on her. Get a new sheet of paper, head it Character, Lady Macbeth, draw a line down the center, and make notes on the impression we get of Lady Macbeth on her own and then with her husband. When you've completed all this, let's move on to Act 2.
The first scene of Act 2 shows Banquo walking at night with his son, Fleance. It's clear he's still thinking about the witches, but he asks the merciful powers, goodness, to restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. Macbeth comes upon them, and Banquo tells him that the king has gone to bed and given gifts to Macbeth's household, including a diamond for Lady Macbeth. They refer to the witches and seem to be hedging around what they really want to say. They leave, and then there's the famous scene when Macbeth, determined to kill the king, sees a dagger in front of him. It's a hallucination. He sees the dagger moving towards the room where Duncan sleeps. The dagger full of gouts of blood. A bell rings, and Macbeth says, "Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell."
Now in scene 2 we see husband and wife together just after Macbeth has murdered Duncan. Lady Macbeth has done what she said she'd do, make the guards drunk and leave their daggers ready for Macbeth. She couldn't stab Duncan because, she says, he resembled my father as he slept. Macbeth can't take his eyes off his bloody hands, and it is only after a while that Lady Macbeth looks down and sees he still has the daggers in his hand. Macbeth is repeating the fact that he could not bring himself to say Amen when the drunken guard said, "God bless us." And then he tells her that he thought he heard a voice which said, "Macbeth does murder sleep, Macbeth shall sleep no more." He refuses to take back the daggers and smear the guards with blood. He's too terrified. Lady Macbeth takes them from him and goes off to do it. A knocking at the gate is heard, and Macbeth looks down at his hands. He is so appalled by what he sees and by what he has done that he believes that if he went to wash them in the sea, they would turn the sea red. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Lady Macbeth returns, and her hands are as bloody as her husband's. She tries to comfort him by saying, "A little water clears us of this deed." They hear more knocking at the gate and hurry back to their bedroom. Macbeth is already regretting what they have done. "Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I would thou couldst."
The third scene starts with a comic character, the porter, making his way to the castle gate. He's been drinking all night. He's drunk. This can account for us not being clear of what he's talking about. Perhaps some of what he says made more sense in Shakespeare's day. He eventually opens the door, and the lords, Macduff and Lennox, enter. After the porter has said what the effects of drink are, a bit rude this, nose painting, sleep, and urine. Macbeth comes down from his bedroom. Macduff says he'll go and wake the king as he has been ordered to do. Macbeth points the way. Whilst he's away, Lennox recounts what a strange night it's been, with lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death. All that Macbeth can reply is that it was a rough night. Macduff comes back, having, of course, discovered the murdered Duncan. Macbeth pretends he doesn't know what's happened and goes back to the king's room. The alarm is sounded, and everyone, including Lady Macbeth, is woken and comes on stage. When Macbeth comes back, he says to everyone that he has killed the guards. Macduff pointedly asks him why he did this. He attempts to explain. Then Lady Macbeth faints in order to take attention away from her husband and is carried out. The king's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, are fearful for their own lives now, and the scene ends with them both deciding to run away.
Scene 4, the last one in the act, has Ross talking with an old man about the strange events in nature that have overtaken the land. Macduff enters and tells them that the sons of Duncan have fled and that Macbeth has been named king and has gone to Scone, the ancient royal city, to be invested. And so this act ends with the witch's prophecy of kingship having come true.
What an action-packed sequence that second act was, and so tense that it has us sitting on the edge of our seats. I bet in Shakespeare's day, even the groundlings, those people at the Globe who paid a penny to stand in the open-air theatre, would have been stock still. Let's look at part of it in detail. Liberty said at the beginning that Macbeth is a play, and she's absolutely right to remind us of that. Now, your work is to think of yourself as a director. The part you're going to concentrate on is Act 2, Scene 2, lines 14 to 74. That's the part which starts with Macbeth entering just after the murder. You'll need your text open for this. What a director, you, has to get out of this is the maximum tension. Macbeth and his wife have done something terrible. Think of the state of mind they'd be in. Look at those questions, exclamations, the short phrases. At line 23, for instance, Ben, how would you say, "This is a sorry sight"?
Well, I think Macbeth is looking down at his hands which have got blood on them, and I think he's almost talking to himself, and I'd have him emphasize the word sorry. He'd say, "This is a sorry sight."
That's good. And it shows you're thinking how the word should be interpreted. Now then, Liberty, how would you direct Lady Macbeth at line 29 to say, "Consider it not so deeply"?
Lady Macbeth is trying to get her husband's mind off what he's done. He's going on about how he couldn't say amen when the guards prayed. I think she's starting to get in a state with him, and she'd emphasise every word and say it like a mother to a child. Consider it not so deeply.
Yes, I can see you're thinking there as well. Now back to you. Write directions from I have done the deed to I would thou couldst, which ends scene 2. That word incarnadine, which you heard when Macbeth said, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood, which means blood-like, was used in English for the very first time by Shakespeare. He invented words when he needed them. Fun to be a director, isn't it? But let's not forget the character notes you're compiling on Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, which are giving you reference material for an essay you may have to write, and are filling out your understanding of these two people. Off you go. You have your notes under themes and imagery relating to evil and darkness. There's a couple for you to add from this act, from what Banquo says right at the beginning in scene 1 to what Ross says in scene 4. Another theme to consider is that of chaos and disorder. Order was very important for the people of Shakespeare's time. They imagined society rather like a pyramid, with the monarch at the top going all the way down to the poor at the base. In 1603, English people were very worried about what was going to happen in England as the Queen, Elizabeth I, had died without a natural successor. Things settled down when, as you may know, King James VI of Scotland came down to become King James I of England. Start a new page and head it Chaos and Disorder, and for this act alone, list the images which show how nature seems to reflect the disorder caused by Duncan's murder. When you worked as a director on scene 2, you were paying particular attention to the language, and you probably saw, if not before, or been told by your teacher, that Shakespeare's plays are written in poetry. This brings in the aspect of language, and I'll be giving you a couple of definitions, so head a new piece of paper with the title Language. The correct title for the form of poetry he used is blank verse. This is unrhymed verse with lines which mostly have 10 syllables. They usually have a definite rhythm. Look at these lines from Lady Macbeth earlier in the play, from Act 1, Scene 7, lines 61, 62. But screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail when Duncan is asleep. Now that's how it's said, but here is the definite beat. But screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail when Duncan is asleep. Do you see how one stressed syllable follows an unstressed one, as in words like courage and sticking? These lines contain 10 syllables, 5 unstressed, 5 stressed. The definition for this is iambic pentameter. Add this to your language list. Not all of the play is written in poetry, though. Some of it is written in prose. Look at Macbeth's letter to his wife, and the porter's speech as well. In Shakespeare, prose is often used by characters of a lower class, as contrasted to the upper class hero or heroine. But now, let's move on to Act 3.
In scene 1, Macbeth is now king, and the scene opens with Banquo alone, showing us that he believes Macbeth has only become king through killing Duncan, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth enter as king and queen, and Macbeth asks Banquo what he is going to do before the feast at 7 o'clock. He says that he is going to go out riding. Macbeth dismisses the court. Now we have a soliloquy, and we see what state of mind Macbeth is in. He knows Banquo is an honourable man, and he is afraid of him. But what is really getting to him is the fact that the witches prophesied that Banquo would father a line of kings. If this is so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind, for them the gracious Duncan have I murdered. Now the servant enters with 2 murderers. This is the second meeting that Macbeth has had with these 2. Macbeth reminds them that he has given the information which proves that it is Banquo they have a grievance against. He winds them up so that they are ready for revenge, and Macbeth makes it clear to them that Banquo is his enemy as well. He says he will tell them where and when they can murder Banquo, and that he wants the son, Fleance, killed as well.
At At the start of scene 2, Lady Macbeth is alone before her husband comes in, and we can see that, like him, becoming queen has not brought happiness. Naught's had, all's spent, where our desire is got without content. When Macbeth comes in, she tries to be the good wife and cheer him up, but Macbeth is not so easily brought round, and we hear that what they've done is giving them both nightmares. The affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. He's still hung up on Banquo. Yes, I know. Perhaps because he knows that Banquo would expose him. The strength of what this is doing to him is shown when he says, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Then he tells her that there should be done a deed of dreadful note, but he won't tell her exactly what it is. The scene ends with Macbeth calling on the knight whose black agents will go about their business.
In scene 3, Banquo is murdered by the assassins hired by Macbeth, and Fleance escapes.
Is that all?
Yep. Except that I have seen a production where the third murderer is Macbeth's servant, who we saw in scene 1. All right.
The final scene of this act, we're at the banquet which was set up in scene 1. Macbeth notices one of the murderers at the door and leaves the lords at the table. He's pleased to hear that Banquo is dead, but when he hears that Fleance has escaped, for him it's as if he's back where he was in scene 2. He feels he is cabined, cribbed, confined. He returns to the table and sees sitting in his place the ghost of Banquo. What the ghost must look like to Macbeth is shown when he shouts at it, "Never shake thy gory locks at me!" Lady Macbeth tries to cover things up for the guests, who, like her, cannot see what he sees. She says he's having a fit and that he'll soon be over it. She angrily talks to him under her breath, but he continues to point and froth and go mad. Then the ghost disappears. With difficulty, Macbeth brings himself round and says to everyone that they mustn't be upset about his strange infirmity. He toasts them all and says how sorry he is that Banquo is not with them. But then the ghost reappears and Macbeth's madness comes upon him again. When the ghost leaves, Lady Macbeth takes him to task and dismisses the court, as she is fearful of what Macbeth might say. He regains his senses and notes that Macduff, who was invited, hasn't come to the banquet. He says he will go and hear what the witches have to say. "I am bent to know, by the worst means, the worst." Then he says the words which show exactly his state of mind. "I am in blood, stepped in so far, that, should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er." She says all he needs is sleep, and they leave. But when he says, "We are yet but young indeed," we know that there are going to be more murders.
In this short scene, Hecate, the queen of the witches, scolds them for not including her in their evil business with Macbeth. She tells them that he is coming to them to know his destiny.
How comes you always get all the short scenes?
Teacher knows best. Oh, but I forgot. Some critics think that Shakespeare didn't write this scene at all, and that it was put in at a later date.
Oh, clever. The last scene of this act shows us that the opposition to Macbeth is underway. Lennox is speaking to a lord, and his words aren't exactly clear, as he has to be very careful about what he is saying. At the end of his dialogue, he knows he is speaking to someone he can trust, because he plainly refers to Scotland as our suffering country under a hand accursed. We also know here that Macduff has gone to England to seek help from King Edward.
Act 3, I always think, is like going into a deep black pit and you're afraid you'll never get out again. Murder, ghosts, nightmares, madness, 20 trenchant gashes on his head. I know we see horrible sights on television news, but that act takes a lot of beating. There's one thing that's said about Shakespeare, that he's still relevant today. Some critics say that he's a marvellous psychologist, that he understands what makes men and women tick, which most of us ordinary people never acquire. So far, in every act, we've seen Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, a husband and wife, a married couple, in dialogue together. You've been keeping notes on Macbeth, good points, bad points, and Lady Macbeth on her own and with her husband. After you've completed your notes for Act 3, I'd like you to think about this question. Get a new sheet of paper and put this heading, Character, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and answer this question with evidence from each act. Who is in control? Think of who's the weaker, who's the stronger, who's calling the shots. Well, you know what I mean.
And you wouldn't use that quote in an essay.
Quite. Liberty and Ben quoted lines from Macbeth which show a particular aspect of poetry. You heard Macbeth say he will do a deed of dreadful note, and that he's cabined, cribbed, confined. There's the repetition of a particular consonant here, the D in deed of dreadful note, and the C in cabined, cribbed, confined. When this is done, it is called alliteration. And here is another definition for you, the repetition of a consonant for poetic effect. Add this to the list you're making. You might have noticed the repetition of certain words by now. Night appears several times to add to your ongoing themes and imagery list of dark, darkness and night. You can do that in a minute. Sleep is also a word that is being repeated. Do you remember the words that Macbeth heard right after Duncan's murder? Macbeth hath murdered sleep, Macbeth shall sleep no more. And this act ends with husband and wife going off to sleep, but we know their sleep is going to be racked with nightmares.
This act opens with the famous cauldron scene when the three witches are putting disgusting objects into a pot to make a wicked potion. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Macbeth enters and he demands they answer his questions, even till destruction sicken. He's willing to see the earth destroyed, but he must know his future. From the cauldron, an apparition of an armed head appears. Macbeth goes to ask a question, but the witches tell him the apparition knows what the question is already. The apparition says he must beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. This confirms Macbeth's guess that Macduff is against him. A second apparition appears of a bloody child who tells Macbeth not to be afraid, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Macbeth applies this to Macduff and says that to be sure he will kill him. A third apparition appears, a child crowned with a tree in his hand. This tells Macbeth not to be afraid, for Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Burnham wood to high Dunsinane hill shall come against him. Macbeth is overjoyed, for how can trees move? But he can't help asking the one question that is gnawing away at him. Will Banquo's descendants ever reign in this kingdom? He won't take no for an answer, and there appear apparitions of Banquo and a show of kings. And Macbeth realizes that the witch's prophecy of Banquo in the beginning is true. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. The witches disappear. Lennox comes on to tell Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England. Now Macbeth resolves to kill all Macduff's family, and he utters the terrifying words, "From this moment, the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand." He'll do whatever he wants to do, whatever it is.
Scene 2 is set in Macduff's castle. Lady Macduff is talking with her son and Ross, and since he calls her cousin, is perhaps a relation. She is angry that her husband has fled to England and left his family at home unprotected. Ross tries to paint a good picture of Macduff's actions, but we can see that he is agitated. I dare not speak much further, cruel are the times. He leaves mother and son talking together. We don't know how old the boy is, but it's as if he is trying to cheer his mother up. A messenger comes in, warning her of danger and advising her to flee. She asks why she should flee, as she has done no harm. Then the murderers enter and we see the son stabbed to death on stage. Lady Macduff exits, pursued by the murderers.
England is the setting for scene 3, for Macduff has found King Duncan's son Malcolm. Macduff wants Malcolm immediately to come back and save Scotland from the tyranny of Macbeth. Malcolm paints a picture of himself as worse than Macbeth, but this is only to test Macduff. He says that he is so evil that he would like to pour the sweet milk of concord into hell. And after hearing all Malcolm's pretended wickedness, Macduff finally breaks down. It is only at this point that Malcolm comes clean and says he was only testing him. There's next a brief passage in which pictures are painted of the English King Edward as a holy man. The scene ends with Ross coming in from Scotland. Macduff asks him how Scotland is, and then asks after his wife and children. Ross gives short answers, but when pressed, he tells Macduff that your castle is surprised, your wife and babes savagely slaughtered. Macduff alternates between fierce anger against Macbeth and remorse at the murder of his family. He brings himself to, and the scene ends with him imploring gentle heavens to bring him face to face with Macbeth.
That last scene is always such a moving one. It's full of so much intense emotion that we can all respond to it. Macduff seems such a good man, and how honest he is that when Malcolm says, dispute it like a man, which means struggle against it like a man, Macduff replies, I shall do so, but I must also feel it as a man. There's another reason why our emotions are aroused at this stage, and this has got something very much to do with the way that Shakespeare has constructed his play. We know, as soon as we see Macduff, something that he doesn't, that his family have already been killed. This is heightened all the more when Macduff questions Ross. There's a special term for this in drama. It is called dramatic irony, when the audience knows something that a character does not. Another definition for your language list. That conversation between Lady Macduff and her son, by the way, is the third point at which prose is used. Here's a question about her I want you to consider. Although she plays a minor role, what purpose does she serve in the play? Bit of a teaser, that one, but consider who the other woman in the play is. And whilst we're considering this aspect of drama, let's also think about the Holy King Edward of England. Answer briefly this question. What purpose does the description of King Edward have in the play? Ben pointed out the reasons for that long conversation between Malcolm and Macduff in scene 3. There are a few more items from it to add to your list on evil. Lastly now, a couple of definitions to fill out your understanding of poetry to add to your language list. You found out about alliteration in the last act. When vowels are repeated for poetic effect, this is called assonance. Here's the definition for your list. We can see this when Malcolm says, yet my poor country shall have more vices than it had before, more suffer and more sundry ways than ever by him that shall succeed. You can see that there are 4 words here having that same U sound. Country, suffer, sundry, and succeed. You've probably noticed that most scenes end with 2 lines which rhyme. Ross, I'll see it done. Duncan, what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. Malcolm, receive what cheer you may, the night is long that never finds the day. The word for this is rhyming couplet. 2 lines with the same end rhyme. Done, won, may, day. You can add this to your language list. It's been noted by some critics that Macbeth's speeches have a lot of rhyming couplets in them, just like the witches. Before you move on to the final act, keep up your character notes on Macbeth. You don't have to do this for Lady Macbeth in this act, because she doesn't appear, does she? Now, let's move on to the final act.
Scene 1 of Act 5 is the first of 9 very short scenes which make up this last act. Some people have said that if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be a film director rather than a writer for the stage.
I wanted to say that.
Sorry, beat you to it. Scene 1 is the famous scene where Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. A maid and a doctor are waiting for her to appear. The distrust that is everywhere now is shown when the maid says that she will not repeat what she has heard Lady Macbeth say without a witness.
Then, Lady Macbeth appears, walking in her sleep. She rubs her hands, trying to get rid of the blood. Out, damned spot! She's dwelling on all the murders she and her husband have been involved in. Duncan's, Lady Macduff's, and Banquo's. She can still smell blood on her hands, and utters the words, "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten these little hands." She returns to her bedroom, leaving the doctor to ponder on what he has witnessed.
Scene 2 shows Scottish lords talking about the English forces led by Malcolm and Macduff coming north. Macbeth is inside the fortified Dunsinane Castle.
Macbeth is inside the castle, confident in what he's heard when he saw the witches. A servant comes in and, frightened, tells Macbeth that 10,000 English soldiers are on their way. Macbeth calls for his manservant to put his armour on, and we hear Macbeth recognise that his life has started to wither like a leaf, fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf, and that he won't have a peaceful old age. He speaks with the doctor, who tells him of Lady Macbeth's illness, which he cannot cure. Macbeth still feels unafraid, till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane.
In scene 4, we're back with the English who are at Dunsinane, near the wood of Burnham. Malcolm orders that each man cut down a bough so that their number can be disguised.
Now we're back to Macbeth at Dunsinane. The sound of the cry of women is heard, and Macbeth is told that Lady Macbeth is dead. This prompts his speech, which begins, "Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow," a speech which shows that life now has no meaning for Macbeth at all. A messenger comes in to say that he saw Burnham Wood beginning to move. Macbeth calls to arms, but this piece of news depresses him. "I 'gin to be aweary of the sun, and wish the estate of the world were now undone."
We return to the English forces assembled for battle. Malcolm tells Siward to lead the charge with his son.
Macbeth fights young Siward and kills him, believing he is invincible against any man that wast born of woman. Macduff enters, searching out the tyrant. Siward tells Malcolm that the castle has surrendered, and they enter the castle.
Macbeth dismisses the idea of suicide, of playing the Roman fool and dying on his own sword. Macduff has found Macbeth and tells him to fight. Macbeth doesn't want to, as his soul is too much charged with blood of thine already. Macduff will have none of this, and they fight. Macbeth taunts him, believing that he cannot be killed to one of woman born.
Then Macduff tells him that he was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. He was not born in the way that Macbeth thinks. Macbeth knows that the game is up and says he will not fight. But when Macduff tells him what they'll do to him, he fights, and shouting, "Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, 'Hold, enough,' is slain."
The play ends with the English victorious. Siward, an English lord, learns of his son's death and is content that he died a soldier's death, with his hurts on the front. Macduff enters with Macbeth's head and proclaims Malcolm King of Scotland.
Malcolm invites everyone to see him invested, and he makes the final reference to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen.
So the play ends with order restored and the end of evil in the realm of Scotland. But do we, who've lived with Macbeth and his wife throughout the play and have seen them at private moments and alone, really see them as a butcher and his fiend-like queen? Take Lady Macbeth, mad, and as we learn at the end, she takes her own life. How do we feel when we see her in her distraught sleep, washing her hands, smelling them? Let's look at her words again. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Look how it contrasts with what she said just after Duncan's murder. A little water clears us of this deed. And see how that simple word all reflects Macbeth's in the lines, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? We've thought of the two of them as a married couple, which complicates our picture of them, as your character note should show. A Macbeth, is he really just a butcher? In scene 3, Macbeth asks the doctor to cure his wife of the mental distress which is attacking her. He wants some help for her when he asks, "Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased, pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet oblivious antidote cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart?" A way of looking at this, however, is that Macbeth wants some medicine for his own mind, memory, brain, and heart. And if he is in a way referring to himself, then he has a rooted sorrow about what he has done. And that marvelous speech, ending with life being like an actor, coming on stage, acting, and then going off, and that life ultimately is signifying nothing, no meaning whatsoever, comes immediately after his wife's death. Complicated? Don't be put off. Remember, in Shakespeare, people are rarely black or white. When the video ends, you can complete your notes on Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, and themes and images. Then, what will you have in front of you? Evidence, in the form of quotes, plus your own thinking, in order to answer an essay in which you comment on themes, imagery, characters, and language, and in order to interpret an extract for its dramatic meaning. You work well. Now, before we go, here are some hints about the writing you will have to do, either in examination or for your coursework. Firstly, a small point, but an important one. If you're referring to the play Macbeth in your essay, put it in inverted commas. So, witches, ghosts, and the calling up of evil occur throughout Macbeth. But when you're referring to the character, after Duncan's murder, Macbeth is too frightened to return to his chamber. You've compiled a lot of evidence about the play. This you should use not as padding, that won't gain you any credit, but you should quote to back up your own opinion. And here's how you can include a quote in the body of your essay. If you're using just 2 or 3 words, put them in inverted commas within what you're writing. Thus, Lady Macbeth calls on spirits and night to turn her into an evil woman. But when you want to include a longer quote, not too long though, you put a colon after what you're writing and write in a bit from the margin. Thus, in Act 1 we hear of Macbeth in battle and that he is brave Macbeth, but his wife knows a softer side to his nature, that it is too full of the milk of human kindness. When you come to write an essay, firstly, understand the question. Get clear in your mind what the question is asking of you and answer that and not one you've made up. Secondly, plan to give yourself a beginning, middle, and end. The beginning gives your reader some indication of what you propose to do in your essay. The middle, obviously, is the main part of your essay in which you weigh up evidence for and against, contrast, compare, where you argue your point of view. Your teacher has probably told you the difference between arguing and asserting a position. When you argue a case, you can back up your point of view. When you assert something, it's just opinion without evidence. The end of an essay, its conclusion, is quite difficult to write. Don't repeat what you've just written. Never start off with, "so as I have said." You haven't said it anyway, you've written it. But try and give the reader, teacher or examiner something to think about. And you can be personal to an extent. Thus, at the end of Macbeth, I can see that he is a butcher. However, what I'm left with is a picture of a man who had an ambition to be king, but when he got it, it didn't bring him any happiness at all. You'll read the play, or parts of it, several times, and ambition is a theme to consider for yourself. When you do this, you'll notice the many references to clothes and clothing. Macbeth is not right as king. He's wearing borrowed robes. Being king is just not him. We're all ambitious for certain things in life, and sometimes the ambition is right for us, it's realistic, sometimes it's not. This is one way in which a play written 400 years ago can still speak to us today. So, keep thinking about the play, know what the words mean, but keep thinking of it as dramatic experience. Be the director you were after Act 2. Think of how the words can be spoken and come alive. You'll find after a while you've memorized whole chunks of the play, and the poetry will have come alive in you.